My name is Robert Smith. I am a safety consultant, and I work in-house at the law firm Fisher Phillips. So I always joke when I speak and do presentations, I always follow that up telling you I'm not an attorney, right? So, but as a safety consultant there, I spend a lot of time at client locations helping them manage safety programs, helping with OSHA investigations, that sort of thing. But really today, we're going to talk a little bit about managing safety as a non-conformance. And what does that look like? What does it mean? So sort of the housekeeping part of this. The PDH code, there it is for you. 47313 is the number to get you credit. You know, years ago, I did college the hard way. I started college at 17, finished my bachelor's degree at 37. So I took that 20-year trek. And it was because that first semester I got the letter that they say, hey, spend some time reflecting on your academic pursuits if you've gotten that letter. But anyway, as I got later in life and was a working adult, had a wife, had 2 kids, was going to school, working full-time, I got to the point in my degree where I was just trying to fill classes so I could get to that 120 credits, and ended up taking a public speaking class because I thought it'd be easy, and I thought it'd get me an easy A and 3 credits, and figured I'll never, ever use this again. Well, I guess the joke's on me, right? But I had a professor in that public speaking class that made an impression upon me that basically said when you give a presentation, you want to do 2 things. You want to make sure that when the audience leaves, they feel like maybe you're an old high school classmate, somebody they hadn't seen in 20 years. They want to have a little familiarity with you. The other thing you want to do is make this presentation interactive. So I'm going to do a little bit of both. So when we jump into this, I'm jumping it right into the familiar part first. So I don't want you to panic and go, what the heck is going on? This is a picture of me and my wife. My wife's name is Becky. Next month, we celebrate 31 years of being married. Last month, my wife celebrated 30 years as a high school math teacher. My wife's incredibly smart. She teaches algebra, geometry, algebra 2, trigonometry, AP computer programming, AP statistics, calculus, probably all the math that goes into the engineering of some of the buildings that you build. I went and got a business degree, right? That tells you kind of where that is. But here's the interesting thing about my wife. My wife's got a really unique skill set. In that I thought over the course of 30 years, she will likely have about 200 to 250 students a year. She's developed a real sense of recognizing when people don't pay attention, when they don't follow instructions, and when they likely are failed to going to turn an assignment in. Now, like I said, I thought this was a result of her developing this in the classroom, but as I spent some time over the last couple of weeks thinking about safety as a non-conformance, I've come to realize that my wife is managing me as a non-conformance. So let me give you an example of this. This is a real-life example. This just happened. So my wife hits me at 7:30 in the morning and says, can you bring home a gallon of milk? Well, I can tell you what happens for me. When I roll out of bed at 5:30 in the morning, my brain has gone right straight to the office, right? I'm thinking about the phone call I didn't return yesterday, the email I didn't respond to, the 10 million other things I've got to do. Maybe I'm traveling to a client location. So by the time my body gets in the truck and backs out of the driveway, my brain is at the office on my second cup of coffee. That's just the way it works, right? So my wife recognized that, right? Recognizes when people don't pay attention. Got it, that's me. At lunchtime, she sends me this text message. Says, don't forget the gallon of milk. Okay, fair enough. Well, guess what? 4:24, she knows I'm leaving the office at 4:30. She calls me and says, don't forget the gallon of milk. Guess what? Do you think I went home with a gallon of milk? You better believe it, right? But really what we're talking about here is managing non-conformance. My wife recognizes that through that history, and again, that was a big old piece of humble pie that I had to eat because I really thought that skill set she developed in the classroom, she developed it 31 years of me not doing what I'm supposed to do, right? She knew I wasn't going to listen. She knew I likely wasn't going to follow instructions, and she knew I wasn't going to get the assignment done. So she improvised. she ended up adopting her strategy to make sure that I would achieve the goal. She recognized the problem, right? She immediately implemented some sort of timely response with a corrective action. She assessed each time whether or not that corrective action was going to be effective. She knew that telling me wasn't going to work. She knew the text message wasn't going to work. She knew the phone call wasn't going to work. So she kept going on and on and on until the desired outcome came to life. Like I said, you best believe I was not going home without that gallon of milk. Now, when we start talking about managing non-conformance, this is nothing new. I mean, really, this is just kind of a prettier way maybe to frame what you probably have seen before, that plan, do, check, act cycle, right? Basically, we've got a standard. We've got a policy or a process that's going to help us achieve that standard. We're going to evaluate whether or not we did it, and then we're going to issue some sort of corrective action. But the other thing that little story about the milk does, it really gets to the heart of safety culture. And let me kind of walk you through that, what I mean by that, with the safety culture aspect of that. When I left home at 7:30 in the morning, my wife defined the expectation for the day, that I was coming home with that gallon of milk. She communicated that message through multiple channels. Now, the important point of that is the message never varied. If you saw the initial ask was bring home a gallon of milk, the text message was bring home a gallon of milk, the phone call was the same thing, to the point where the expectation became well known, right? And like I said, I wasn't going home without that gallon of milk. So there was accountability that's created that. Now, we think about safety culture sometimes, we get these warm, fuzzy definitions, right? It's the attitudes, values, and beliefs of employees that drive the organization. We get something that we really can't utilize every day in our day-to-day jobs. And again, I feel like this is just a different way to sort of frame the idea of safety culture. It's defining expectations. It's telling your people what you expect from them. And you're telling them, and you're telling them, and you're telling them again until it becomes well known. And then by itself, organically generates accountability. I would tell you, if you got some time later this evening, go to YouTube and just search out Nick Saban's 5 Choices. That's the title of the video, Nick Saban's 5 Choices. Who's a college football fan? Anybody Alabama fan? Alabama? Roll Tide, right?
No, Nick Saban.
Okay. So here's the thing. Those of you who said not Alabama? All right. Stay with me on this. That's all I'm at. Look, I got you for like another 42 minutes or so. Just stay with me on this because I'm not an Alabama fan either, right? My oldest son's a civil engineering major. He went to Virginia Tech. Who's a Hokie? Any Hokies? There we go. Hokie in the house. My youngest son went to Virginia Military Institute. 2 completely different schools. So I'm not an Alabama fan, but I will tell you in about a 55-second clip, that video will tell you everything that you need to know about safety culture in your organization. Because in those 5 choices that Nick Saban talks about, he basically says every day we have choices when we wake up. And those 5 choices include the opportunity to be bad at something, the opportunity to be average at something, the opportunity to be good at something, or point blank, be excellent or elite. Now, when we start talking about safety culture, and there was in the last session, they talked about, maybe companies that have bad safety culture. There's a severe violators list for a reason. Not many people on it. We don't want many people on it. But when we start thinking about safety culture that's average, what does that look like? Maybe we've gotten lucky. We haven't had an accident, but we don't really have all the elements of a program in place. We don't have written policies. We don't have training records. We get into a good safety culture. We might have all those things that check the box, but we're not driving that continuous improvement. Our safety is sort of flatline. And just like what Saban was saying, to be at the University of Alabama, to be on the football team, to be excellent and elite, it takes a special dedication, a special passion, and a special drive. And really and truly, when we start talking about managing safety as a non-conformance, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about taking your safety program to this idea of being excellent, elite, managing that safety proactively and continuously such that the opportunity for improvement is always there. I love that video with Nick Saban. I would have shown it to you. I was just worried I was going to get a letter from a lawyer saying not to use it, but it's out there in the public domain, so just take a look at it. Now, getting kind of into the heart of managing safety as a non-conformance. Did you notice the familiar part of that too? Not only did I tell you about my wife, but I told you where my two kids went to school. See that? Virginia Tech and VMI. There you go. That professor would probably be very proud of me. So this is an example from a fabricator situation. Managing safety as a non-conformance. It's very similar to what you would do with quality. Very similar to an ISO 9001 process or an AISC process. And so this spreadsheet, this company is tracking a safety issue as a non-conformance. In this particular case, employees weren't wearing PPE or weren't wearing eye protection. They were noticing a history of increase in eye injuries. They also were noticing the safety electrical panels didn't have the 36-inch clearance. But again, I'll go back to the example of my wife and the milk and telling them again. Perhaps the corrective action here, let's just go with the electrical panel piece of this. Perhaps ensuring that all the panels had 36 inches clearance was enough. I mean, that's a perfectly fine corrective action, right? But when we start talking about managing safety as a non-conformance, we have to bring that safety culture element into it. And by that, I would mean, would the corrective action be stronger if I go up on the breaker panel and I put a sticker on it that says maintain 36 inches clearance? Or if I go and I paint the floor, block it out 36 inches in front of the panel. And perhaps because I may have a fear of something striking the panel, I throw up some bollards, right? What have I done by doing that? I've told them the message time and time again, different channels. The message is still the same. We don't want to have anything 36 inches in front of the panel. But we bring all those elements together. It brings in that element of safety culture and accountability. Because at that point, if they put something in front of the panel, you got to look at somebody and go, hey, what are you doing? Everything has been well defined. The same thing with the eye protection. The eye protection piece of this may say, hey, all I got to do is go to the foreman and remind him that employees need to wear PPE. That's great. But who had to deal with supply chain disruptions over the last 2 or 3 years? Yeah, did you ever run out of PPE? Yeah. So maybe just going to a foreman and telling them, make sure everybody's wearing PPE is not necessarily the symptom of the bigger problem, right? We haven't dug deep into it to really understand what's going on. Another example, thinking about, this is an erector example, similar thought process here, right? Scissor lifts aren't being inspected. Okay. Maybe giving the foreman an inspection tag is all it took. I don't know. But if the foreman's like me and his brain has left the job site and maybe at home thinking about, rather the second cup of coffee, thinking about taking the kid to Little League practice, the tags may end up on the dashboard of the truck and may never get to where they need to be, right? So maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. What else do you think? Again, we're going to the interactive part of this. You know, what else, if you were faced with this situation and you wanted to manage this safety as a non-conformance, what else would you throw in there as a corrective action to further enhance the opportunity for success in driving the continuous improvement piece? Don't be bashful. Somebody hit me with something.
Well, we've had this situation in the past. So what we do is we put a plastic sheet, like a slip sheet. We put the inspections in there, and then on the lift itself, where the controls are at, by where the key goes in, you do your inspection. Just a little strip of tape.
Yeah.
That helps.
Steve, what you got?
And this is all off the shelf product. We have so many lists of Orlando International that it became difficult to be able to pull off that much going on. And there's an off the shelf product right there that has, as Kathy is saying, it's a checklist section hangs on the lift or hangs on the forklift, by the way. And when you've done the inspection, there's two parts in there, so you pull it out, and immediately the color of it shows you whether you can get 100 feet away and look at it and go, yeah, that one's been inspected. You can see that they pulled it out and filed the inspection, and now the indication of the inspection is very evident. So there are off-the-shelf products that will allow you to very quickly ensure that all your folks can inspect correctly.
I think you should also question whether or not your employees have been trained on it, but they're not doing the inspection because they don't know how to do the inspection.
Right on the nose, right? There's a whole host of issues, not only from training, but what's the oversight? What's the supervision? I mean, absolutely. What did you?
And so our company works with Procore. Procore has the ability to print out a QR code sticker with the on the lid. When I scan that QR code, they'll perform their inspection.
Yeah. Anybody else leveraging technology like that? He indicated that his company's using an application that basically allows them to put a QR code or sticker, barcode sticker on a machine. Handy devices, right? Some of them that I've had experience with, I can set the time by which that inspection has to be done. And if the operator fails to do the inspection, push messages start going out, notifications start going out to a supervisor or to a manager, site manager, that sort of thing, that, hey, we got a problem. Not only that, but also for, what if it's failed? I mean, Steve mentioned having, a bunch of lifts on a job site. Well, if you have one that goes down for service, maybe you can be down one if you've got 30 on a job site. What if you got one on a job site that goes down? And you've got a crew of people standing around and you're trying to figure out, how am I going to keep them working and keep them productive? Technology allows you to do that, pushing those notifications. Similar to, kind of along the same lines here with the rigging inspection. Same thing. We're not doing the rigging inspection. We're basically going to address that with the foreman. But what else do you think could be, again, thinking about that safety culture, what's the other elements of that would perhaps enhance compliance, eliminating the non-conformance?
Steve gave a class on schedule versus safety earlier. I think the biggest thing with operators is, even though they get paid hourly, so as long as they want to do something like an inspection, they're not going to do that because they got to go. There's no point in me spending an extra 5 minutes to inspect my machine. I know it works, it just uses 20 minutes to go. I'm going to go use my rigging, just like it was. So they're just trying to save time, and that's usually because they're being pressed their time by the same.
Right. And that's a tough, that's a safety culture issue that has to be overcome, right? And it's, I don't know, maybe it's inherent. I have a client that, their workforce is like that. They will cut corners and do things they're not supposed to do and know they're not supposed to do because they feel like they're saving the company money, therefore making the company more profitable and therefore increasing their opportunity for bonuses and that sort of thing. This particular company compensated employees strictly on productivity. Well, what do you think is going to happen, right? When you bonus somebody strictly on productivity, in the scenario we walked into, this was a painting contractor. They're painting the outside of a townhouse, and there's 3 power lines coming into the back of these units from a pole, comes into the yard and splits 3 ways and goes to 3 units. Power company had come in and covered one line to the house that was being painted, but the crew was erecting scaffolding so that they could take a poly drop cloth and put over the other 2 lines. And, when we stopped them and said, hey, what are you guys doing? This is dangerous. We said, well, we didn't want to, it would take, 6 weeks for the power company to come back out. This job would be delayed. We're getting late in the calendar year, so this is in the Chicago area. So you can imagine, once you hit about October 1st, your opportunity to paint outside is hit and miss. And so they felt this pressure to get this job done, and they cut corners to do it. I was on the phone with that client just before this session started. He was telling me yesterday he had an employee that was on a balcony, and there was a railing there, perfectly fine, but there was a deck chair on that balcony, and the employee was standing on the deck chair because he didn't want to go down 4 flights of stairs to get a 4-foot ladder. Well, that's a non-conformance, right? probably shouldn't be running, using somebody's deck chair to stand on. And that's the types of things that we run into. So as we think about, your organization, and this is really kind of where the heart of this, because, like I said, there's no secret sauce in what I just presented to you because you're already doing it. So when we think about the standpoint of how can safety be managed as a non-conformance in your organization, I'm curious to hear maybe about a recent safety incident or a recent discovery that you've made that you said, hey, we can manage this now as a non-conformance, and here's how we do that. Who's got something that they would care to share?
Well, I think that once you establish your safety program and these preventative actions are essentially, over time, they become your safety program, right? So, like an observation of something that's unsafe goes into your log or whatever metric system you're using as a preventative action, but without identifying the source, right, you're going to start seeing repeats of the same thing, which is your safety program. You know how to prevent that, which is where, to close the loop on this, you have to have a great disciplinary action program that's uniformly enforced, right?
Yeah, but that's half of it, right? The disciplinary program is half of it. And here's where I feel like so many organizations miss the mark to drive safety culture. Like I said, I feel like that's the wind in the sails for most organizations. If you can tell that message and tell it and get momentum, you're going the right way. So disciplinary action is one piece of that, but also recognizing good behavior. How often does that go completely overlooked, right? Again, on the phone with a client just before I walked in here, they have had multiple issues with violations to lead protocols. They've had issues with violations to fall protection protocols. We have really, and they, again, in the market they're dealing with, their job is seasonal, right? From about April 15th to about October 15th is when you can paint outside in the city of Chicago. And what it basically means for that organization, there's about 30% every year, brand new employees trying to come in. And we're fighting that same thing, right? Employees coming in, 3-day growth on their beard before they go put their respirator on to go work on a house that's built in 1880. We know there's lead paint there. We know it. But yet they're dealing with that type of scenario. So going back to my point of rewarding good behavior, one of the managers twice this week has stopped employees in the shop in the morning and basically handed them a razor and said, go in the bathroom and shave it off dry, because you can't go to work like that. The organization failed to recognize and promote that individual or promote that behavior within. And I feel like they just miss an opportunity. And disciplinary action is absolutely key to it. OSHA will tell you that they're going to see documentation that if you're going to say it's employee misconduct, you've got to be able to show that absolutely you were disciplinary in your employees, you put in through retraining, you're holding them accountable. But I feel like there's a big gap in safety culture when we fail to recognize the desired outcome, right? Who else? Who else has got something? Go ahead, Steve. Oh.
I recognize Ray Reddy back in the room when we were QC auditors. Because Ray, I'll say 2 years ago, Ray, you spent time with Tim and Mike, and one of the times I was not able to be at that particular one. We recommended something, and when you guys are all AISC certified here, until 720, you got a non-conformance procedure. Every one of you guys got. And what he encouraged us to do was to analyze it. Within the tools that are on the AISC website, there is a spreadsheet. You guys have never gone to that. I'll let Ray tell you where it is. But there's a spreadsheet there, and you can change the headings of it, depending on whether you're a wrecker or a fabricator or whatever you want to do. You can actually modify that. And then it allows you to analyze where your non-conformances are coming from. And Ray said, you guys can do that. You only need to analyze what's going on here in your organization, not just list out 250 non-conformances. And Tim did. And what came out the other side of that, from a safety standpoint, is he was able to isolate that a large percentage, over 30% of our incidences and non-conformances were coming from material. That initiated our activity instructor, and it drove that one recommendation that Ray made, analyze your non-conformance, whether they're quality or safety. And then that's what sets your goals, that's what sets your initiatives, go to work, fix your problem. Ray, where are what part of AISC site are those tools?
If you go to the certification tab, certification research, there's a whole page for research available to you guys. So download it for you.
Non-conformance worksheet.
So it works, it's just that simple and, admonition, hey, analyze this. You guys are setting quality goals, take a look at this. This is how you find out how your non-conformances are pointing you in the right direction to set your goals to go after. And they did it, and it works. So I would suggest everybody consider that.
And see, when we get to that point where we're recognizing where we're missing the mark, we're recognizing our non-conformances, and we're going back and we're analyzing them, that's really that deeper root cause analysis of it, than more so than what I was saying kind of with the spreadsheet, right? We have a problem with people not wearing their eye protection. Well, let's go make sure the manager knows that. That, like I said, that may solve the problem, but there may be something else. And so, yeah, the non-conformance worksheet, although it may be something that is specific to AISC, it would apply in 9001. It would apply in ISO 45001. And really what we're doing is when we get to this point where we're analyzing these non-conformances, we've moved into that category of excellent or elite, as Nick Saban would say of his football team, right? There's certainly people on that football team that enter the transfer portal. Every college has it, right? So there's going to be people that are bad. There's people that are average. There's people that are good. There'll be people that are good that'll never make the team. They'll never step on the field. And what's the difference? It's the studying the film. It's going to the gym and working out. It's eating the right foods. It's going to practice. It's taking care of the academic stuff. It's behaving off of the field and away from campus. All those things come together to put that player on the field. And that's what we're talking about with safety here. When we start talking about managing non-conformances, not only managing them, but analyzing them to the point we're trying to figure out what's the cause of it. And we may think it's, simple as, hey, they're just not wearing PPE. But it goes back to your point. Were they trained to wear PPE? Do we have supervisor enforcement? Do we have enough? All those things go to that point where you're getting into the realm of having a safety management system, perhaps without actually going down the road of being ISO 45001 certified. You're taking the best of those programs and you're putting them in place. And it gets you to that point, and they talked about this in the last session, where the OSHA standards are the floor, right? That's the minimum protection for worker safety. But when we get to the point where we're talking about managing these non-conformances and analyzing them and putting things in place that may change policy, may change procedures, may change training, we've taken that to sort of a best-in-class safety program, or at least the opportunity for best-in-class. I mean, certainly just looking at non-conformances would just be one piece of that safety management system or that culture. I mean, certainly we got to think about management buy-in. We got to think about our documentation and all that kind of stuff that goes into play with that. But certainly that's one element. Yes, sir.
To take that one step further, Steve, once you realize it's my material handling, and you get a couple material handlers in with supervisors when you brainstorm and do the final watch, why is this a problem? Identify training needs or whatever. You're sending a message to your floor or your workers, this is important to us. Productivity is important to us too, but this can save lost times. And you start creating that culture among your organization. Management does take this serious. They wanted my input. They wanted me to spend an hour brainstorming.
Yeah, I will very often. I'm an advocate, and when I say this, I get the look like I've got three heads. But I will often say that safety can be a profit center, and most of the management team won't look at that, right? They will look at that and say, "You're flat out costing me money. You're costing me money, time, training. You're costing me money with PPE, different things. You're costing me money with lawyers and citations and all this kind of stuff, right? And I'm familiar with Steve's example. Steve, how did that impact your business from a productivity standpoint? Yeah, because you go from maybe touching something 4, 5, 6 times to now we know that if we touch it 4, 5, 6 times, we're going to hurt somebody, and we figured out a way to do it by touching it only twice. That's a win-win for everybody, right? So we can make the business case for diving into these analytics and getting return on investment. We just have to be thinking about it from a different standpoint of not being on the defensive saying, hey, C-suite, give me a little bit more budget this year. It's like, hey, I need this money, and here's what I'm going to give back to you if we do it. And I'll be honest with you, not a lot of times that the safety person is comfortable in that position. We just don't think about it like that. But I absolutely think there's a strong case to be made for that. Who else has got an example? We'll do one more example.
I think by increasing the breadth, like what a non-conformance has to go through the different channels throughout different departments of your organization, a lot of times safety is not that at all. Incident report or what have you goes directly to the safety person. The safety person then is responsible for addressing it. Now, safety is clearly reliant on the safety person instead of what we all say is safety is on everybody. So having it go through, channel through, either through different types of reporting or kind of mapping it out like Stephen Ray mentioned with that spreadsheet to critique it. And what you've been saying this whole time too is first, critique your process. What led to this incident happening before you just blame the employee for misconduct or not doing something right, because chances are his or her decision was made because of the process that led them to make that decision. They just kind of had to take a pick and might have ended up because of the incident. If you don't have it kind of how you're staging it to be with non-conformance, a lot of times organizations aren't going to question the processes they have in place or the practices they use. It's just so much easier to say, well, the employee's not wearing PPE, so that's on him. Or, no, he's going to have.
So just curious, makeup of the room, who's got a safety function in their current role? So, trick question.
Proper address finding the employee, whether or not I should have that.
I feel like organizations are quick to throw out the employee misconduct claim. I feel like if you blame an employee, it would have to be so egregious that you would have to, there's just no doubt, right? But what I typically see when the employee gets blamed is, well, we trained them. Here's their training record right here. They just went through lockout, tagout training last week. And guess what? They amputated their arm today because they didn't lock the machine out. And I feel like organizations are very, very quick to throw that out there and say, look, I've trained them, given them all the materials, given them all the tools to do their job and be successful. But maybe we haven't. And that's a problematic because going to managing that non-conformance, how many times I'm dealing with this at a client location now. There's about 55, 56 forklifts in the facility. Right? There's 1,200 employees, 600,000 square feet of manufacturing. So you can imagine 36 acres under a roof. That's a big place. Every day I walk through that facility and something is damaged from a forklift. But we're not pulling people off and putting them back in training. And even if we are, the next day stuff is still being run over. So are we doing a deep dive into the quality of the training to realize, what are we telling them? What's the messaging? And I feel like that's a lot of times when we start blaming employees, we've failed to go back to that messaging aspect of it, just like with my wife and the gallon of milk. I mean, as simple as that example is, there's no way I could screw that up. No way I could screw that up. And that's really where we need to be with our employee training. It needs to be so clear-cut and so precise and so consistent That's the bigger aspect of that. And that's something for you with larger organizations. You've got multiple trainers. How are we assuring that we're delivering the same message across different plants, different trainers, different states? That becomes a huge, huge challenge. And a lot of times that leads back to the employee misconduct.
You know, when I gave my presentation yesterday, one of the things that I brought up is that something similar to what you were just talking about, is that a lot of times when we have an incident that involves an employee, management automatically has an assumption about what happened. Well, I know what happened here.
Yeah.
And that's the only path that they go down, instead of, hey, was it really all that? What was it that guy's had this morning? What was he thinking about when he came into work? What did he, did he have a disagreement with his supervisor? All those things that come into play, instead of just wasn't following the rules.
Let me give you an example of employee misconduct that I feel like, even though that wasn't the defense in that particular fatality, the argument could be made as it was that. So I want you to imagine this particular company makes applesauce. Well, if you know anything about the farming industry, you've got harvest season. Well, typically apples are coming into this facility anywhere between September and November. Well, they're making all the applesauce for Walmart. That's a lot of apples, right? And they got to have a lot of apples continuously throughout the year. So this campus has these large cinder block buildings that they will basically bring them in, floor to ceiling, they will stack in crates of apples. Once they get it full, they close it up, they seal the doors off, they pump that building full of nitrogen. They get it, it's 2% oxygen at that point. You know what that does? Puts that apple in a suspended state so that January, February, March rolls around, they can go and grab those apples and process them. Part of that process is that they have to go in periodically into that room, grab an apple, take it back to a lab and test it to make sure that it's not rotting. Because the old saying, one bad apple spoils the bunch, there's nothing more true in that particular setting. This particular case, employee had been on the job for 31 years. Now, to go into the building where the apples were being stored, self-contained breathing apparatus, tank on the back. Okay? Guy's been there for 31 years. We're getting that job. He knows what the requirements of that job are. This particular day, he decided to not put on the self-contained breathing apparatus. He, standing outside the door, took a deep breath, opened the door, went in to get the apple. He didn't have to go far, right? The process of that, there was a threshold at the bottom of the door. He went in, he stumbled on the threshold, just like that. You could probably make the argument that's employee misconduct. But there was another employee there that allowed him to do it. So there's a lot to that. I feel like, this is an important topic now because as we've just curious, for those of you that have the safety functions, or even if you're not, in your organizations, think about this. What was the impact of COVID on your organization in terms of injury rates? Hiring people. Think about the HR nightmare of what COVID did, right? The facility that I'm working in now, 1,200 employees, right? They had this great onboarding process. They sent employees down to local community college. They took the test. They sent them down. They got a drug screen. They ran criminal background check on them. Only hiring the best of the best, right? COVID hit December of 2021 in that facility when the Delta variant went around. There were 1,200 employees. There was 438 of them out with COVID. You know what that did? All that went out the window. They stopped the testing. They stopped the background checks. They stopped the drug screening. They went to warm bodies. If you're a warm body, come on in. We'll put you to work. What do you think happened to injury rates? They went absolutely through the roof, right? Automotive industry as a whole around the country runs about a 3.0 for their injury rate. This facility peaked at about 8.6. It's almost 3 times the national average. It's a direct result of their hiring practices. Now, I think there's still some of that lingering. As we've sort of have come out of COVID and gotten back to work full time, staffing back up, some of those bad behaviors are still out there. You know, who stopped training during COVID because we couldn't be in the same room with each other, right? Forklift certifications became tough, right? Because you got to do the practical on, at the facility, but nobody would let an outside trainer come in. So what did the laps? How many people did we put on forklifts, that didn't get trained? I just saw an article this morning, and I live in Virginia Beach. Employee was on the job one day, drove a forklift off a loading dock, landed on top of him and killed him, 30 years old. And I think there's still some of that in the workplace now. So I feel like, this idea that we're talking about managing non-conformances, looking at them, changing safety culture, I feel like it's probably a way out of some of the bad behaviors that were learned over the last couple of years. So we've got about 10, 15, 12 minutes or so. Let's questions, comments, discussion. We have a lot of discussion. We've had a lot of comments. But who's got something? Edson, what you got?
So, to go along with the fellow that there said, bringing the guys in and having their input into a situation, it brings buy-in from the guys and also being proactive. So I'm in construction. If I see a guy out there, he doesn't have his safety glasses on, I don't generally deal with this person. I'll keep a pair of safety glasses on me. I just go hand in pair. Here, brother. Put these on until you can go get the ones that you typically wear. Yeah, being proactive versus reactive makes worlds of difference. Sure, absolutely.
Who else? Question, comment, concern?
I have a comment. I don't want to pit union and non-union against each other, but during the pandemic, I think that the union construction industry did a very good job of bringing people in, keeping them at work, training them, doing all the right things. In 2020, the difference between 2020 and 2019, we had like 50 less people working for us. We're about 1,000 person company. And we had less injuries in 2020, 2021, and 2022 than we had had for years before that. And I think it's because we looked at our processes and we said, we need to be more consistent, we need to go to technology, we need to bring in people who can put together a training program online and we'll share it with everybody so that that's that consistent message that gets across to everyone. We had vetted, people reviewed it to say, oh, you forgot to say this about that. And it also helped to keep people from getting derailed. Because occasionally when you stand in front of a room, you do an orientation, and somebody asks you an off-the-wall question, and man, you are off on that. You're off on a track that you didn't intend to be on, and then you're looking at your watch going, oh crap, I told the manager I only have an hour to do the orientation. Oh. And now I spent 15 minutes yapping about something else. But I do think that the union construction industry, and that's where I'm from, did a really good job. Just my opinion, but that's where I'm coming from.
Well, you at least one agreement with you because Edson's up here shaking his head, yeah.
Even though I agree. Didn't really change much.
Yeah, I don't think construction really changed. I mean, we changed our processes and we changed the way that we did our onboarding and everything. But overall, I think we were pretty successful.
Other comments? It's not new, was it? I mean, what I'm presenting to you is probably stuff you're already familiar with in terms of this plan, do, check, act, and just going in and trying to dissect into, what's really happening. But I think the important point of doing this is to Steve's example is that, yeah, I mean, it keep people from getting hurt, but it also can save you money. And that's a win-win. So. What does my wife teach? Where'd my son go to school? VMI, Virginia Tech. That college professor is just probably smiling ear to ear. He's probably looking down from heaven, but he's probably smiling ear to ear saying, good job. Thank you for your time and attention. I am happy. I will hang around. If you've got a question that you weren't comfortable asking in a group setting, I will do my best to offer it up. I would also, too, encourage you to feel free to plagiarize, duplicate, copy anything here that you saw. I have a client that is using that milk example, and he told me he's going to send me a 10-cent royalty every time he uses it. He's using it every day. So I think as simple as that example is, there's a lot of value in there when you start talking about managing non-conformances, building safety culture. Again, I'm just a big old piece of humble pie for me, because I thought really that the wife was learning those skills in the classroom, and come to find out I'm the source of the problem. So might have to go home and 5Y that. I don't know. We'll have to think about it. But thank you again. Appreciate your time.
If you are interested in learning more and even earning a certificate of completion, visit AISC.org/Steel Academy. And if you believe in the importance of safety in the steel industry, email John C. at steelmergers.com to learn about sponsorship opportunities. Triple S Steel believes in carrying a big inventory, buying in massive volumes, and stocking steel across the country. From California to Tennessee, Triple S is in position to deliver steel to your door quickly, efficiently, and at a reasonable cost. In any dimension you need, Triple S Steel saws, shears, and burns steel with exacting precision. Bottom line, Triple S Steel gets people what they need to build things out of steel.